All right, that might just about do it. Welcome everyone. Looks like we have a pretty good turnout, which is great. Obviously these 8 a.m. lectures can be a bit rough, but as we said, turning up to lectures is critically important, and you guys have most of you 3 in a row, so you sort of get into the rhythm of things over that, I guess, which is good. Today, as I've been saying, we're going to be talking about university study skills. So anyone that's looked at the Learn JCU page for this lecture, I've put up I've put up the lecture notes, but I've also put up a PDF called Studying, and it's under the heading Guide to University Studying or something like that. All right, that's a document I put together a couple of years ago because I had a lot of students coming to me saying, all right, well, once I've looked at the tutorial questions or whatever that I've been given, I don't really know what to spend the rest of my time doing to study. And there's a lot of other things you can spend your time studying. So that's just my sort of couple of suggestions of things you could fill your time with that would be very well spent for studying. We'll go through it a little bit in this lecture, and we'll also talk in this lecture a little bit about maybe the way your minds work and the way that you actually start to remember or understand ideas and topics and theories at a deep level, because up till now it might be okay to just rock up to a quiz or an exam and just put the information on the page and pass and walk out and forget about it. That's no longer the point. The point is that you guys end up walking out in 4 years as graduate engineers understanding things at a really deep level such that you can do your job very well. All right, so that starts right now. Every topic that you learn, every subject that you do, if you can understand the content in a deep way, then that content then feeds on to what you do later on. And so you need to take ownership of that, and I'll talk a little bit about how we do that. All right, our subject learning outcomes, and this one's squarely number 6, practical skills for university life. We'll do some other skills as well, like talk more about group work and how do you research and use online resources and that sort of stuff throughout the semester. But this is a major one, and this is one thing that will really help you out in your studies. All right, so studying. What is the purpose? Everyone read that? I like those guys. Basically, you guys actually have to use your brains. All right, and it's you guys actually understanding the way that works and kind of controlling your own learning, because that's up to you from now on. All right, so just as a little initial task, I suppose, what we're going to do is spend a couple of minutes and you're going to think about your time before uni and try and recall something where you learnt something, all right? Something that was either taught to you in a class or that you specifically studied or when someone explained to you. Do any of you have that moment that you look back and think, I really learnt something when that person said something to me, or they did something that it really sunk in and it stuck? All right? Everyone spend a couple of minutes just thinking back over the last 5-10 years. Was there a moment that you still sticks with you, something that stuck? So have a discussion amongst yourselves and think about it for a couple of minutes. Okay, hopefully that's long enough for you guys to have come up with something. So what are some of the things that you guys have learnt that sort of stuck with you? It doesn't need to be a big idea. It can be as simple as, your dad showing you something in a, an engine bay, or, getting taught how to cook something or something like that. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to share? No one? Okay, well think for a second about if you did come up with somewhere where you learnt something, how was it delivered to you? Was it a lecture with writing on the board? No? Was it something practical where you got your hands dirty and actually worked with it? It tends to be when you actually interact with an idea that it actually sticks in, and that's the stuff that stays for a long time. And I want you to continue to think about that as we start talking about the way you study, because if you expect to go to lectures, watch it on the board and have that sink in and then run off to the exam and get a HD, you're kind of mistaken, yeah? What you need to do is interact with ideas, because the way we learn, some people are lucky enough that they watch it on a board and it sinks in, and that's great. All right, that's a very, very small number of us. Most of us learn by interacting with an idea and then having to explain it to someone, or actually having a practical example of the theory. That's when it actually sinks in. So it's on us to try and give you practical examples, but it's on you to also find them. All right, so when you hear a theory in a lecture, you can't just rely on the lecturer to put it into practical context for you. If you can be thinking when you're listening to an idea, all right, where does this apply, or how does that apply, or where might I have seen that before, and then when you're studying you think about the same thing, how might I actually impose this on something that I actually know, that's when stuff sticks. All right, so that's one tool right at the very beginning that you can start to think about, and hopefully later I've got a bit of a visual aid for studying as well, and maybe that's something that'll stick with you, maybe it won't, but there's a few examples of that type of thing. But as I was saying, there are particular situations where topics, ideas, theories, learning sticks with us. And a lot of those situations are generally either where it's been practical or where our understanding's been stretched, or we've had to think about more than just what we're being told. So where does it sit? How does it work? And those sorts of situations that are really good for learning are when you have to teach someone, for example. All right? When you have to teach someone and you don't really understand what you're doing, you'll explain it to them and they'll go, huh? And then you have to actually think about it and go, all right, how do I put that into terms that they're going to understand? And the actual act of that puts it into terms that you understand in your head. And it's stretching your understanding of it to a point where you can phrase it such that someone else understands it, but it teaches you as much as it teaches them. They always say that one of the best ways to learn something is to teach someone else, and that's why we really encourage you to be in study groups as well. Because you might have one person that really gets it and a bunch of people that don't. The person that gets it's going to get more out of it than the people that don't, because they're going to then teach everyone and have a much deeper understanding of it. All right, so don't think you understand it, you don't need to be in a study group. You're going to get more out of that than the other guys are. So it's useful to everyone. All right, having to explain something clearly or having to write a coherent summary. So both of those things are thinking how someone else is going to understand something and then phrasing it that way. Those are really useful ways to get your ideas in a line and actually understand an idea. And working through a difficult problem, something that really stretches your understanding of it. All right, that's what you'll do in exams, and hopefully you'll do it in your study time as well, and I'll talk more about that. All right, can I have a volunteer? Let's go in the middle there, someone strapping and strong. Anyone? I'm going to choose someone. Up you get. Very good. All right, I got that. Come on down. Actually, just wait. Here we go. Right, you rock me some bicep curls, please. Yep. Is that doing anything? Little bit? Okay, good. All right, give me that one back. Now, 20 kilos, be careful of your feet. You get a bicep curl or lift it up? No, can't lift it. Okay. So, this is obviously very different to this. Thank you. Can I go? Yep. Yes. All right, round of applause. Very good. All right, so that's an example from strength training. Most of you will have had some exposure to exercise, strength training, etc., right? That's not doing anything for your muscles, because how does strength training work? Anyone? Anyone spend any time in the gym?
What it is slowly building up endurance so that your muscles are able to gradually able to take more and more weight on as they go.
Exactly, building up endurance, stretching, stressing the muscles such that they start building more muscle mass and are able to take more load in the future. So it's a gradual process. It's not, all right, now I can lift 400 kilos. It's you start small and work your way up. Now, if you stay on this weight, now I bought this for my 2.5-year-old daughter because she likes doing exercise when I do exercise. So this is quite heavy for her, but for the rest of us, this is not, right? This isn't going to do anything to your muscles. You can do 1,000 of these and maybe that'll be about the same as doing 1,000 of those. That might do something. You do 10 or 15 of those in a bicep curl times 3 or something, and that'll actually start to do something for most people, all right? So strength training works through using heavy weights and stressing your muscles. Endurance training is through muscle stress as well. So if you're going to run a marathon, you're not going to run for 5 minutes and go, righto, I'm good, and then go and run a however many, 30 kilometre, what's a marathon? 42, there you go, 42 kilometre marathon, are you? You're going to have to work up to it and you have to build on it every day. And I'm sure some of you are seeing where I'm going with this. Repeated regular exercise. Who's heard of muscle confusion? Has anyone done a bit of weights training? Muscle confusion. So if you are going for a jog, say, and you're trying to lose weight and you go for a jog every afternoon, your body becomes really efficient at jogging. It knows how to get the most out of that jog and use the least amount of energy and things. And what that ends up being is after, a couple of weeks of jogging every day, it starts being completely useless for losing weight. All right? Because your body's become so efficient that it doesn't need to burn a heap of energy, which is effectively your fat, to try and get that running. So you've got to confuse the muscles. So you mix it up with maybe a jog and then some sprints and then some weight training and then some different things. All of those things actually enhance the way that your body works in terms of muscles. And obviously when we exercise, we have to fuel and we have to sleep, we have to have rest days, and we repeat. So basically everything that works for muscles works for your brain. All right, so when you're studying, if you can approach it the same way that you might approach a regular exercise routine, it will work amazingly well for your understanding of topics. All right, so number one, you need to stretch your mind. So if you've just seen ideas in a lecture and you've got a tutorial and you go home and you look at the answers and you just fill out the tutorial and then you come back to uni and watch a lecture again, how stretched is your mind? If it's really hard, maybe a little bit. But for the most part, that is not stretching your mind, and that is insufficient for university study. University study requires that you learn a topic in a lecture, you go home and you try a problem that's harder than what you've seen, and you do not look at the answers. Because the second that you look at the answers, you take that weight and you turn it into this. All right? If you have a maths problem and you look at it for 5 minutes and go, I don't get it, and you just go to the back of the book, you are using the weight that my 2.5-year-old daughter enjoys using. All right? Please associate this in your mind with looking at an answer in the back of the book. That is useless for study, or almost useless. Because you'll remember the answer then, but it's just memory work. You'll remember the answer so you can write it there and then you'll walk away from that study session and you'll forget it. And it's the same as what you forget in a lecture. You see it on a board, you walk out, you forget it. That's not learning, that's not studying. What you need to do is sit there and stare at a problem and try and make your brain work. Feel your brain straining, all right? And that's not just stare at an empty page for 2 hours and go, righto, well that was a useful study session. If you can't actually answer it one way, then maybe what do you know? Start writing things down. Try and work backwards around the problem. Come up with some ideas or strategies, or write down a flowchart that you think you might be able to solve this in, and stuff starts to fall into place. You'll actually go through that exact process in the order of 8 times a year between now and, when you finish. Because every single one of you will have it in an exam. All right? You'll be sitting there for 2 hours going, shit, how do I solve that? And you'll just be either hands in the air, or you'll be thinking frantically, how do I do this? That's actually one of the best study things you can do. That exam is very useful for study. If you can do that in your study time before you get to the exam's going to be a cinch. All right, so stretching your mind in the study experience is so, so important. Try and find opportunities to do that, and please don't use the pink weight. All right, understanding. Do you guys understand the different levels of learning or the different depths of learning? Have you ever seen anything related to a Bloom's taxonomy or a triangular pyramid of learning or anything like that? No. Cool. What we're actually going to do is work you up this pyramid during your university years. All right? Bottom of the pyramid, so what we start, a lot of what your subjects will be starting at is knowledge. Knowledge is basically, I tell you an idea, you write it down and give it back to me. All right, regurgitation or memory work. Some of what you will have done so far is that. That is not particularly useful for an engineer because everything in engineering is different and you need to be using all this ideas and applying it to complicated design ideas. Next up is comprehension. So that might be I give you an idea and you can explain around it and sort of explain where it came from or something like that. Application, so you get a maths equation and now you have a question that's completely different to what you might have seen before, but you can apply the theories that you've learnt. So that's getting up there. You're starting to understand a little bit more deeply. Analysis is, all right, here's a bridge. Is it going to fall down? And you use the tools that you might be applying, so what sort of vortex shedding might be involved, what sort of natural frequencies, what are the stresses of the bridge, how much force is there, and you actually start analysing things based on that. Synthesis is design. So synthesis is now, you can use all of that analysis, you understand all of that underlying sort of fundamental theory, and now we're going to use it in a creative sense. So now we've got, rather than just a bridge that fell down, why did it fall down? Now we've got a canyon and we need to build a bridge. All right? And then evaluation is basically you overseeing someone who's designing that bridge. So it's kind of the next level above that because you can assess how good their, say, synthesis is. Right? So this is the development of your knowledge. This is how your brains work and the types of levels of understanding that we're going to be working towards. In this subject, we're talking mainly knowledge and comprehension. But as you get through a lot of your first year maths, physics subjects, we're pushing towards application and we'll work our way up to where in fourth year you're largely doing design tasks and things, and there'll be very little knowledge content in your actual lectures. All right? But the better you understand this, the better you can actually see where certain things that you're learning are pitched and the way that you need to interact with them. Okay? So that's just, I wanted to expose you to that because that's quite important for learning. We talk about it a lot in academia circles, but it's useful for you guys to understand a little bit about that right from the very beginning. All right, so as I said, on LearnJCU, I've put a guide to studying at university PDF. Let me just open that up and we'll just have a bit of a look what's in it. Study tips and tricks, studying. There we go. Now, what's that going to do? All right, so that's just a bit of a blurb. All right, so it's in three. So planning, understanding theoretical content, solving questions and practicing for exams, and then exam techniques. So 4 different categories, all right? Who plans their study time? Anyone? Cool. So we gave you a study planner, or Claire was giving you that study planner and filling out where your lectures are and where you're going to put time for studying for MA1000 and PH1005 and so forth. Has everyone filled that out? Hands up who works well with a future plan? Who works well reflecting on what they have done and trying to improve on it? Anyone? So there's a few different ways you can do it, but it's going to get very complex at university and you're going to have a lot of stuff to do. And if you don't plan your time, you're going to struggle to find the time to do things. And so you can plan the forthcoming week, or at the very least you can reflect on the week that just was and try and improve on it and understand how that works. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I've got some strategies. So a typical strategy is no planning whatsoever. Fair enough? A basic level strategy could be managing your time, planning a study schedule, blah, blah, blah. Read your subject outline clearly and ask your lecturers exactly what will be on the exam, that kind of stuff. Honestly, we'll tell you, hey, like you go to your lecturer and say what's on the exam. For the most part, we'll give you 5 minutes and explain what's on the exam. You don't do that and you're sort of behind the 8 ball. So feel free to ask us. The worst we can say is, it's a big secret. But, you know, the lecturers will give you their time if you're interested and you actually go up and talk to them about it. And if they say, well, look, it's mainly this topic and this topic, we'll do a little bit of that topic, but not too much because we didn't spend much time on it. You know, your study time should be mainly this one and maybe a little bit of that one. Because if it's only a 10% question, there's no point spending a third or a quarter of your time on it. You might want to spend 10% of your time on it. Okay, so you can plan your study around what you expect to be on the exam. Establish a routine. If you're easily distracted, plan your study and location to avoid distractions. So understand yourself, understand the way that you work. If you are likely to check Facebook and watch TV and talk to your friends and things like that, turn your devices off or go to the library and get away from that sort of stuff. So be conscious of the way that you study. An advanced level might be to understand your weaknesses and plan your time around reducing them particularly. So you manage your time in study such that you focus on your weaknesses, focus on problems with that, and then look at the stuff that you're good at the end because you're already good at it. You don't need to waste your time going over it and over it. And plan your weeks carefully, preceding exams and so forth. Here's a bit of an example of an assessment planner. So this is just your 4 subjects in each week. You can maybe write down what topics or ideas you'll be studying there, but you've got kind of the weekly planner. It's a bit similar to that. So just, you know, come up with these types of tables and things. Now, this is an important one, understanding theoretical content. The typical strategy for understanding theoretical content is to go through the lecture notes, reread them all and go, right, I understand it. All right? Time and time again, that's how people do that. And that is the baseline, almost useless way of doing it. All right? Because what you actually want to do is understand the content. You don't want to memorize it because there'll be questions on exams, particularly with maths and physics, that you've never seen before. So just understanding or memorizing all the things you saw in a lecture won't help you in the exam. What you need to do is understand why it works and then you can apply it. So basic level strategies could be to then write your own summary, to write an A4 equation sheet. Even if it's closed book, having that equation sheet in the act of finding every single equation you need to know then gives you a reference to then go and write them out 1,000 times each or whatever, and you know you've got every equation, you haven't accidentally forgotten one. Repetition drills. Have you guys done much repetition? It's kind of decreasing in schools, the idea that if you need to remember an equation, you write it out 100 times. It works. It's time consuming sometimes, but for some reason it's kind of gone out of schools and we see the maths scores sort of going like this as a result of it. Right? Repetition works, and if you haven't used it at school, maybe start using it now. If there's a really important equation that's not going to be written down for you, write it out 100 times and see if you can remember it then, because that'll really give you at least a chance at remembering what you need to remember. Build your own lecture. You know why we understand this stuff? And it's not because we're particularly smart. It's because we had to make a lecture so that we can actually explain it to you guys. Right? The actual act of making that lecture, coming up with the content, thinking about how you guys learn and understand, and putting it in a 45-minute form factor and handing it to you, the act of doing that actually teaches us really deeply. So we understand the stuff really well, but it's not because we understood it before, it's just because we put a lecture together and had to come up with how you guys learn, and now we understand it. Build your own lecture. Yeah? Particularly on a topic that you really don't understand very well, go and do research. Go on Wikipedia. Go on, online. Find journal papers. Find extra textbooks. I think I've got in here, you can get every MIT course online for free and every Harvard course online for free. Go and get a Harvard lecture. Put it together and build your own one, and then in your study group, give the lecture to each other. Each one do like one lecture for the week, and that's a really good way of learning stuff that you might not have thought of until now. As I said, lots of universities put their stuff online, so look for it. I'll put some links on the LearnJCU to it all, but it's super easy to find. Study based on your learning outcomes. I gave you learning outcomes, so study based on it. Think about which lecture actually aligns with those. Categorise your tutorials based on those and so forth. So there's a few other things there. You guys can learn through that, read through that. And then advanced level theory strategy might be understanding how you particularly learn. So instead of just doing research on the ideas, Spend a bit of time, firstly in this first year, because you're going to get less time next year, and I know that sounds daunting, but everyone seems to manage as you go along. You have less time later and later, but you get better at it. Spend a bit of time learning how you learn. So do you learn from a lecture? Do you learn from writing it down? Do you learn from repetition? How do you learn? How does your brain function? Because the better you understand the way your mind works, the more efficient you can be in your study time. All right? So spend a bit of time this semester, this year, thinking what worked and what didn't, and try and implement what worked more often and what didn't less often. Yeah? So it's up to you guys to actually understand your minds, because everyone's going to be very different. All right? Some of you might be sort of this category, some of you might be this category, but if you can understand the way you work, then you can study a lot better. There's a few other advanced techniques there. I expect everyone to go through and have a bit of a read of these. All right, solving questions and practicing for exams. Typical strategy, go and re-answer all the tutorial questions you've already done. Yeah? That is not going to get you anything other than a little pink weight. If you've forgotten it, maybe 2 pink weights. Yeah? But just answering the questions you've already done, and textbook questions and quiz questions that you've already done, any learning associated with them might have happened when they were unfamiliar to you, but now they're familiar to you. So you need to go a little bit further than that. As I've said, never, ever, ever look at the solution before solving a problem. Start to understand the way that you're solving questions, so create flowcharts and things like that. So maths questions, physics questions, generally they follow the same flowchart, and there will be equations associated with each box of that flowchart, and it's just a matter of what things you do know and what things you don't know. If you understand all of the equations in the flowchart for analysing it, then it doesn't matter what the question's actually worded like. You should be able to answer it pretty easily. So that kind of thing is useful. Rough estimates. Engineers are all about understanding whether a result is right or garbage. All right? You need to get to that point. So you need to look at a question and in the first minute think about what is a reasonable answer. Because if you think a reasonable answer is 100 megapascals and you get 1 billion megapascals, either your estimate was crap or you got something wrong, and there and then you can go back and go, hang on, what was it? And you just, put 1,000 instead of a 1 in somewhere or something like that. If you have an understanding of what the solution should look like, you can use that to make sure you've got it right. Very, very important, and you do it in your study time. Build this into your study time. Learn how to identify rough estimates to things, all right? So I'm giving you things that you can do in that study time that aren't just like going through tutorial questions, that'll really help you solve these problems in exams. 2 different ways to answer the question is kind of like that. So if you've got one way to answer the question, then you answer it a completely independent way and they both give you the same answer, sweet, you know it's right, or you're much more confident that it's right. In engineering, we never rely on one solution. If you give me a computer model, I'll tell you to jump in the lake. If you give me a computer model and a hand calc and an Australian standard calculation and an experiment that are all within about 15% of the same answer, I'll believe it and I'll allow you to go and build it and put a student in it and race it around a track. All right? So multiple ways of solving the same solution, solving the same question is really important in engineering. You can do it right from the very beginning, because if you have time, like half hour at the end of a maths exam, go back and solve everything a different way and make sure you get the same answer. And you can come up with the ways to solve that differently, find those methods in your study time. All right, so use your study time to do that. Take a maths problem and turn it into a worded problem. Everyone loses their frigging minds when you get a paragraph rather than just an equation, but it's the same thing. You just need to be able to interpret and understand what it's asking. So a worded problem is always harder than just a written down problem, but it's the same thing. So if you have a written down problem, like an equation, and you turn it into a worded problem, so the velocity of something going up is this and that and the other, then either you can solve that or you can hand that to someone else in your study group and they can solve it, and it's sort of stretching your mind a little bit. It might be the same simple problem, but it's more useful. And then advanced strategies, and the biggest one is the first one, is create a mock exam for yourself. So you know how I said we understand it because we write lectures for you guys? We understand it because we write assessment for you guys as well. So if you have all of the topics and ideas, write your own exam. If you've got 5 in your study group and every single one of you writes your own exam and hands it off, you've now got 4 completely unfamiliar exams to study with. And if you write your own solution to your exam and then hand it off, then you can mark each other's assessment. I think that's the next one, because actually marking someone's assessment and working out where they went wrong teaches you about how things work as well. So these strategies are really useful strategy, and I promise you, you've got much more in this document than you'll ever have time to actually implement in your study time. So there should be no excuse for anyone coming to me and saying, look, I've read all the questions in the book and all the lectures and now I don't know what to do. Go straight to this document and just pick a box and try it. If it doesn't work for you, don't do it next time. But this sort of stuff is really useful to kind of fill that study time in a way that gives you a deeper understanding of stuff. And then I've got some exam techniques. So how do you actually sit an exam? We'll talk more about that at the end of the semester when you're getting closer to the exam. Typical strategy is answer everything, but what you want to actually do is prove that you've got everything right and make sure that you structure your solution time and all that kind of stuff. So have a read through that. I won't go through it now because we don't really have the time. Wake up display settings. There we go. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? Is that starting to give you a bit of a broader understanding of the sorts of things you can do in that 5 hours a week per subject that you need to find right from now? All right? So right from now, if you don't have, and I know for a fact you do have hundreds of maths questions that you should be going through for your stock take test. You probably have some physics examples that you should be going through as well. So that's the sort of stuff you can go through. Do not look at the answers. Just try them. Just make your mind work. If it's confusing, spend time thinking about it. So you've got stuff to do there. But in this subject, you can start to think about how you learn. How did you, for a particular exam in high school, the last one, how did you study? How did you learn? What was effective? What wasn't? Start to review that and think reflectively on how you function. All right, so an example might be a physics test. So this is something that you'll probably do in your mid-semester test. These are the types of equations. Basically, it's velocity stuff, so projectile up in the air, and you know some things about it and you don't know some things about it. So how fast is it going, or how far does it go, or how long does it take to fall? These questions are great. Physics questions are so brilliant to make your own problems with. Because basically there's maybe 5 or 6 unknowns. So what was the angle initially, and what was its initial velocity, and how high did it go, and how long did it take, and how far did it go, and how long did it take to hit the ground? And all they're going to do is choose 1 or 2 of them to be unknowns and then word a question around the rest of it. You're perfectly capable of doing that. You just understand what all the variables are, understand what all the equations are, understand what the flowchart is, and then just choose 1 or 2 things to be unknowns and then think up a problem. So what's something that is a projectile that you guys are familiar with? Tennis ball? Soccer ball, basketball, what else? Bullet, anything? Rocket? Spear gun, anyone go spear fishing? A car, potentially, but that's sort of a bit more complex. Coconut falling on someone's head on a deserted island. So all of these examples, they're just examples of stuff. And physics applies to that, and these equations apply to that. So all you do is word a question around one of those things that you actually understand. So if you're a basketball player and you understand, word a question around it with an unknown and then go out and throw a basketball and see whether it worked. And the act of doing that, firstly, is relatively fun, and secondly, you now understand it at a far deeper level than just going through the problems that you've been given over and over and over again. Okay, so this is just one example, but it's really easy to write your own questions if you start thinking sort of outside of what you've learned in lectures. So planning each week, we talked a little bit about planning. This was the potential sort of suggested or an example study guide that Claire put together. I suggest you all do this sort of stuff, and I said I'd talk more about the reflective side. So I don't plan very well. I don't plan my week, other than I know that I have to be here at an 8 a.m. on a Wednesday. I don't really plan what I do. I have about probably 300 different, maybe 400 different jobs that I might do during a week. And I've categorised them all. So anything related to teaching gets a T, and this lecture is T50, so EG1000 lecture. And prep for this class is T49 and so forth. And I've got, all of these different categories. and I record everything I do in 15-minute blocks in a diary where I have a day per page. All right? And then at the end of the week, I look back and look where I spent all my time. And I work out where I was inefficient. Did I stuff around heaps that day? Did I get lots done that day? Was I really, really efficient? How much time am I actually spending on teaching as opposed to research, as opposed to admin, because that's something we have to manage. And I can reflect on how well I've run my week and where I should do better. And so in your context, if you reflect on your week and you found you've only spent an hour studying for MA1000, you've spent 20 hours on this subject for assignment work, obviously, you know, maybe you have a good assignment, but getting a HD in this subject and failing everything else is a complete waste of your time. I promise you now. This subject's fun, and so people have a tendency to spend time on it, but please, fundamentally pass your difficult maths and physics and so forth, and then just get whatever other time you've got for this subject, okay? So 4 passes is heaps better than a HD and 3 fails, I guarantee you that. So look back on your week, if that's what you're going to do, and how effective was your time, how much did you spend, where do you need to change? The other thing is, you don't get a little bracket on a 15-minute block for checking Facebook or watching TV, yeah? So just because you've sat down and you've called it, it's study time now, doesn't mean that you get a big bracket that says study time. Record only what you're actually, when you're focused and thinking on a problem. Right, so that might be in 15-minute blocks, you get up and go and get a drink, come back, another 15-minute block or whatever. That's fine, because that's starting to tell you how you study. And if you find that you're only doing 5 minutes out of every 30 thinking about a problem, that's already something you need to know, because you should be able to improve that number. All right? So record your time. If you plan and you understand study well, then sweet. But if you're struggling to find where your time's going and you're finding it inefficient, recording your time in a strategy like this, just go out and get you a day per page diary and write it down and see how you go. It's quite useful. I found it really, really good for my own efficiency. So I give this to my PhD students and things, and they all use it as well. So you might as well give it a go. Effective study. So I talked about it a second ago. Is effective study spending 5 minutes looking at a maths problem and 15 minutes checking Facebook and then another 5 minutes? No. You need to immerse yourself. You need to get your mind on the task for longer than 5 minutes. It depends on how you work. Maybe it's a 15-minute block, maybe it's a half hour. You've got to give yourself rests, but the rest doesn't count as study. All right, so don't think that, you know, a 2-hour session with, 45 minutes of TV in the middle is a 2-hour session. That is less because of what you're doing. And if you have a problem with devices, and we all have devices everywhere, and you pictured bottom right there, dude's got 2 laptops and 3 phones and Facebook and headphones and all the rest of it, turn them off. So if you have a problem with devices, and I think all of us do, it's a really good strategy to turn them off or put them in a different room or something like that. If you get a phone call, fair enough, get up and go and get it, but don't be texting your friends and all the rest of it while you're trying to study, because your mind won't be working. It'll be a complete waste of your time. So if you're finding 5 hours of study for MA1000 is insufficient, have a look at what that study looks like, and if it involves using devices and stuffing around, then maybe you need to improve that. Or just find more time for it, but no one's got more time. Study in a well-ventilated, comfortable, quiet place. So if you can find that, the library's got some lovely spaces to study in. Obviously set up your study space wherever you live or study in a way that's kind of conducive to that study. Natural light is best, but sufficient light, so don't study in a dingy hole. Get light. The more you strain and look at something, the more fatiguing studying will be. So if you can be comfortable and just see what you need to and have enough space to sort of space out your documents and things, that's useful. And as I've been saying, working in groups helps for lots of reasons. One is to keep each other focused, because you're less likely to screw around when you've got 4 other people looking at you going, why are you screwing around? All right, so that's very helpful. Teach and learn. I've talked about how teaching someone is just as efficient as learning someone, and you've got 5 minds there, so chances are you all understand at least part of the subject and you can communicate that to each other. Very, very useful. You can share study style and tips. So you guys are now starting to think about how you study, and you can say, oh, well, I did this and that worked out for that particular situation. You can share the way that you study. Very useful. And you can swap problems and assess each other. So if you're making all of these problems, you kind of already understand what the answer is. It's less useful for you to solve them than it is for you to hand them to someone else and then get those problems back. Okay? So study groups are really, really useful. The more you use them in university, the more successful you will be. So if nothing else, then maybe use your groups from this subject for it, or one of the other subjects for it. Or if you've got a friend group here, use them, or everyone get together and have a good time, whatever. All right. So that's pretty much what I've got for today. We'll talk a little bit more about this, particularly towards the exam time. But if you need more help, those past sessions that we've been talking over and over and over about, that is university students who have gone through this and understand how they work, understand how they study, and they can share that with you if you ask them. All right? So you might get 3 or 4 different study techniques from them that'll be different to what I've given you, that might work better for you than what I've given you. Join a club. And you join a club because now you're with later year guys and you can ask them exactly the same questions. How did you do on this workshop? How did that work in this subject? How did you study for this subject, etc. And do some research on your own time about study methods and the way that your head works. All right? If you start thinking about the way you learn, you will learn much better. Cool? All right. Any questions on that? No, great. Have a great Wednesday, guys. Hopefully that was useful too.